smell alcohol.
Step out so we can do a few quick checks.
I'm not answering questions and I'm not doing tests.
If you've got nothing to hide, you'll do the test.
I'm not required to help you build a case. I'm saying no.
Step out. Now.
Okay, but I'm not doing any tests.
Watch his hands.
This sergeant thought he was handling a basic headlight stop in a fast food parking lot. He didn't realize the driver he'd chosen wasn't going to chat, wasn't going to help him out, and wasn't going to perform roadside tests just because a uniform asked. The driver stayed calm, refused every test, and forced the sergeant into a corner. And instead of making an arrest, the sergeant tried something else. He ended the stop with a ticket, then still told the driver he wasn't allowed to leave in his own car. Tell me where you're watching from, your country, state, or city. And if you're into stories where people stay composed and the system has to answer for what it does, like and subscribe, because these are the situations that show you how power really works. Now, back up to the beginning. On April 2022 in Cedar Ridge, Pennsylvania, Sergeant Daniel Mercer saw Ethan Ward in the Taco Harbor parking lot and initiated a stop for a defective headlight. That was the stated reason from the start. Mercer approached like it was routine, but he immediately steered the interaction toward a DWI-style investigation. Mercer claimed he smelled a fruity, alcoholic odor coming from Ward. He also said Ward's eyes looked watery or glassy. Those two observations became the justification for what Mercer tried to do next: turn a headlight stop into a sobriety investigation without saying it outright at first. Mercer began asking questions and pushing for compliance with simple checks, the kind that sound casual but aren't casual at all once they start getting written down as clues. He wanted Ward to follow along, do the eye test, do the balance tests, and give him something, anything, that could be used to claim impairment. Ward didn't give him that. Ward refused to answer questions. He refused eye checks. He refused field sobriety tests. He didn't insult Mercer. He didn't raise his voice. He kept his tone controlled and repeated that he didn't answer questions and he didn't take tests. That refusal changed the mood. Mercer kept trying to get Ward to participate, and when that didn't work, the stop started to expand. More officers arrived. Their presence didn't add new evidence, it added pressure. The dynamic shifted from one officer trying to coax cooperation to multiple officers standing by, while Mercer took a harder line. Ward was ordered out of the vehicle. After that came a pat search. Mercer framed it as officer safety. The narration argues that nothing described so far supported a frisk beyond the fact that Ward refused to cooperate with sobriety testing. Refusal on its own isn't a threat, and it isn't a weapon. The search still happened. With Ward outside the car and surrounded, Mercer had reached a point where most officers either arrest for DWI or end the fishing expedition. Mercer did neither in the clean way people expect. He did not arrest Ward for DWI. Instead, Mercer issued only a headlight ticket. That decision matters, because it shows Mercer wasn't willing to commit to the claim that Ward was impaired in a way that justified an arrest. The original reason for the stop stayed the only official enforcement action. That should have ended it, but Mercer continued controlling the outcome anyway. After handing out the ticket, Mercer ordered Ward not to drive. He told him to call someone to pick him up, because he refused the tests. This is the key moment of the whole incident. Mercer didn't have enough or didn't want to take the risk to arrest for DWI. He still wanted the consequences of a DWI stop, so he treated refusal as the reason to block Ward from leaving. The narration's argument is straightforward. Once the stop ended without a DWI arrest, and the ticket was already issued, the officers had no legal authority to keep Ward from leaving in his own car. Telling him he could not drive wasn't a courtesy warning. It functioned like a penalty for refusing to help build the case against himself. Ward stayed mostly calm through it. He didn't try to talk his way into permission. He didn't turn it into a shouting match. He kept his refusal consistent and took in what was happening, because at that point it wasn't about the headlight anymore. It was about whether officers could create a you're not arrested but you're not free situation, just because a driver wouldn't take roadside tests. Ethan didn't go home and brag about it. He didn't turn it into a parking lot war story. He went home irritated, replaying the logic over and over. Mercer didn't arrest him for DWI, wrote a headlight ticket, then still tried to control whether he could drive. That felt like a punishment for refusing the tests, not a safety decision based on real evidence. So Ward did the one thing that scares departments more than a heated argument on the roadside. He started documenting. He wrote down the timeline while it was fresh. Location, time, who showed up, what Mercer claimed, what Mercer demanded, and what Mercer did after he chose not to arrest. He didn't fill the notes with emotion. He kept it factual because facts survive scrutiny. Then he started asking for records. Body camera footage, dispatch logs, any report Mercer wrote about odor and eyes, any mention of impairment, any mention of why Ward was frisked, any explanation for why Ward was told he couldn't drive, even though he wasn't arrested. In small towns, people assume those requests get ignored. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they get delayed. Sometimes they come back with heavy redactions. Ward kept going anyway because he already understood the game. The roadside is where the pressure happens, but paperwork is where accountability happens. A civil rights attorney got involved not long after. Nadia Pierce didn't treat it like a viral moment. She treated it like a pattern-based case. She listened to Ward's account and focused on one core issue. Once Mercer issued the ticket and didn't arrest for DWI, what legal basis was left to keep controlling Ward's movement and prevent him from driving? That question drove everything. Pierce built the case from the inside out. She didn't start with big accusations. She started with decisions. Mercer chose not to arrest. Mercer chose to frisk. Mercer chose to expand the stop with backup. Mercer chose to block Ward from driving. Every choice needed a reason that could survive daylight. Ward filed a lawsuit. He didn't just sue Mercer, he sued the other involved officers, the Cedar Ridge Police Department, and the town. That wasn't dramatic. That was strategy. When a stop turns into an unofficial punishment, it's rarely just one person improvising. Policies, training, and supervision usually sit behind it, even when nobody wants to say that out loud. Once the lawsuit was filed, the tone changed. Suddenly, people who wouldn't return calls had to respond through counsel. The town had to look at risk. The department had to consider how the stop would sound when read aloud in a legal filing instead of explained casually on the roadside. Then came the part Ward didn't expect to matter as much as it did. He started digging into Mercer's background. Not rumors, not social media. Records. Ward obtained records from Mercer's prior department. According to Ward's claims, those records showed a pattern. Mercer allegedly had a history of treating refusal of sobriety tests as if it were obstruction, and there were other prior issues that suggested this wasn't just one sloppy night in a parking lot. That's when the whole story gained weight. Because if the same officer keeps landing in the same kind of controversy, the question isn't only what happened in Cedar Ridge. The question becomes how many times it happened before, and how many supervisors looked away. Pierce used that angle carefully. That angle. She didn't need to prove Mercer was a villain. She needed to show a consistent approach, turn refusals into problems, escalate to control, then justify it after the fact with vague language like odor, eyes, and safety. The lawsuit forced Cedar Ridge to answer questions they weren't used to answering. Why did multiple officers respond to a headlight stop in a parking lot? What specific facts justified the frisk? What objective signs supported impairment if no arrest happened? If Mercer believed Ward was too impaired to drive, why wasn't a DWI arrest made? If Mercer didn't believe that, why block him from leaving? Those questions don't sound emotional. They sound logical. That's the point. Logic is hard to dodge when it's written in numbered paragraphs. By the time the filings and records started circulating, the reaction around town split the way it always does. One group framed Ward as difficult because he refused tests and didn't just cooperate. Another group saw the stop for what it looked like: an officer trying to create consequences without taking responsibility for an actual charge. Quiet conversations started up, the kind people only have when they think nobody's listening, where someone admits they've seen similar behavior and just never had the energy to fight it. Ward kept his posture the same as the night of the stop. No big public speeches, no victory laps, just steady movement through the process. Because at this stage, the win wasn't an argument. The win was forcing the town and the department to deal with a record. Mercer and Cedar Ridge didn't expect Ward to keep pushing once the night was over. They expected the usual outcome: a complaint that goes nowhere, a frustrated driver who eventually drops it, and an officer who learns one lesson: pressure works. That's not what happened. Ward's lawsuit forced everyone to treat the stop like a real event with real consequences. The town couldn't shrug it off as an officer's discretion. The department couldn't rely on vague language and hope nobody challenged it. Lawyers got involved. Insurance got involved. Suddenly, every decision made in that Taco Harbor parking lot had to be defended with specifics. Here's where things tightened up fast. The core problem never changed. Mercer didn't arrest Ward for DWI. He issued a headlight ticket. Then he ordered Ward not to drive because Ward refused the tests. That's not a clean legal position. It's a workaround. It looks like punishment without charges. And when a case looks like a workaround, it attracts scrutiny. In the litigation process, both sides had to produce records: reports, Bodycam, dispatch communications, policies, training materials, supervision notes, the kind of stuff most people never see. Ward's attorney, Nadia Pierce, kept the focus where it hurt. Not on personalities, not on whether Mercer seemed nice. She stayed on sequence and authority. What justification existed at each step and what authority remained after the ticket was issued. That's the chessboard. Because if Mercer truly believed Ward was impaired, the normal move is an arrest, or at least a clear legal process. If Mercer didn't believe that, blocking Ward from driving becomes hard to justify. Either way, Mercer's decision tree looked inconsistent. Then the prior department records became the pressure point. Ward had obtained records from Mercer's previous department that allegedly showed a pattern of treating sobriety test refusal like obstruction and other misconduct issues. The details in those records didn't need to be identical to this stop. The value is what they suggested: a repeated approach to the same kind of situation. Push for tests. Treat refusal as defiance. Escalate control. Use broad phrases to justify it after. That's the kind of background that changes how a department's lawyers advise them. Patterns create risk. Patterns make just this one time harder to sell. Now, zoom out to Cedar Ridge as a town. Small departments don't like lawsuits because they're expensive. They also don't like them because they force policy questions into public view. Town officials start asking whether the department trained officers correctly. The department starts asking whether Mercer followed policy. Supervisors start asking what they signed off on before. And even if nobody admitted it publicly, the internal worry was obvious. If Ward's case got traction, it could open the door for other people to come forward. That's how these things spread. Not because everyone suddenly becomes brave, because one case creates a path. Over the next weeks and months, the community reaction kept splitting. Some locals stayed stuck on the old script. If Ward refused tests, he must have had something to hide. That's a simple story, and people love simple stories. Other people looked at the actual outcome and couldn't ignore it. Mercer didn't arrest for DWI. So why try to stop Ward from driving? What was the legal basis for holding him in place after the stop ended? Why did refusal get treated like guilt? Quietly, more stories surfaced. Not always formal complaints. Sometimes it was just people talking to people they trusted. Someone mentioning a stop where the officer kept fishing, someone mentioning being searched with no real explanation, someone mentioning the feeling that officer safety meant we can do whatever we want. Ward didn't become a loud public figure during this. He didn't turn it into a personality brand. He did what he did in the parking lot. He stayed controlled and kept his actions consistent. He let the process speak. As the case moved forward, Cedar Ridge had choices. They could fight it fully and gamble on a judge buying the department's framing. They could try to narrow the case and protect the town from broader liability. They could also move internally and start correcting procedures to reduce damage, because even if they won in court, the facts would still look bad to the public. Departments often do that last part quietly. New guidance memos, updated training, reminders that refusal isn't obstruction, clearer rules for when someone can be prevented from driving and what documentation is required. The kind of changes that get described as routine, even when they're triggered by a lawsuit. For Mercer personally, the heat didn't come from a single dramatic moment. It came from the accumulation, every record request, every filing, every time an attorney forced his choices into plain language, every time his prior history got mentioned in a context where it couldn't be brushed off as gossip. That's the real consequence in these cases. The officer loses control of the narrative. Ward's long-term outcome depended on the legal process, but the practical impact showed up before any final court decision. Cedar Ridge had to spend time and money addressing a stop that should have been a headlight ticket and a goodbye. Mercer's judgment became a topic inside the department. Policies and supervision got examined. Town officials had to face the reality that it's just a routine stop can turn into a liability event when an officer tries to punish refusal without an arrest. Here's the lesson that sat underneath everything Ward did. He didn't win by outsmarting Mercer in the moment. He didn't win by arguing in the parking lot. He won by staying calm, refusing what he wasn't required to do, and forcing the system to explain itself later, using its own records. That's what accountability looks like in real life. It's slow, it's boring, it's paperwork. It's also the only language institutions consistently respond to. So, if you're watching this and thinking about what you would have done, be honest with yourself. Would you have folded just to get it over with? Would you have gotten emotional and made it easier for them to paint you as the problem? Or would you have done what Ward did? Kept it calm, kept it firm, then handled the fight where it actually matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it, especially someone who thinks refusal automatically equals guilt. And subscribe if you want more real, grounded stories, where everyday power moves get exposed and people push back the smart way.
Hey, hold up. Stop right there. Sir, what happened? Set the bag down.
Why would I put it down? It's mine.
Open it.
No, I'm not doing that. What is the reason I should do that?
Shut up and do what I said or I will arrest you right now.
I'm acting like someone who doesn't want to be treated like a thief in front of strangers.
Turn around.
Officer Evan Rourke pulled his cruiser in behind Darren Cole's car, so close Darren couldn't back out. He stepped out with his hand hovering near his weapon and acted like he'd just caught something in progress. Rourke demanded identification and told Darren he looked suspicious, even though Darren was standing in a mall parking lot with a jewelry store bag and car keys in his hand. Before we get into it, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you like stories where, cameras and paperwork expose what really happened, hit like and subscribe, because this situation turned into a real accountability test. Earlier that day, Darren had gone to Tyson's Corner Center in Tysons, Virginia, to buy a birthday gift for his daughter, Nia, who was turning 16. He chose a jewelry store because this was one of those birthdays that mattered to him. He made the purchase, got the branded shopping bag, and walked out like any other customer. Nothing about the moment looked like a crime. Darren reached his car, opened the door, and started putting the bag inside. That's when Rourke rolled up. The cruiser didn't stop off to the side. It stopped behind Darren's car in a way that controlled the scene and removed Darren's options. Rourke came in with a tone that assumed Darren owed him an explanation. Darren stayed calm and moved carefully, because he understood how fast a routine contact turns into a dangerous one when an officer is already treating you like a suspect. Darren handed over his identification. He didn't argue about that part because he wasn't there to prove a point with his hands. He was there to get home safely. After that, Darren asked the one question that mattered. What legal reason was there for stopping him? And what crime was he being accused of? Rourke didn't give a clear answer. He said Darren matched the description. He didn't name the description. He didn't name the crime. He didn't reference a specific call from the store or a report in the area. He left it vague on purpose because vagueness gives an officer room to escalate without committing to facts. Darren didn't raise his voice. He asked for the details again, and he kept his words measured. He wanted the reason stated plainly, because he knew the difference between a lawful stop and a fishing attempt that relies on intimidation. Rourke shifted tactics. Instead of explaining the stop, he focused on the shopping bag. He ordered Darren to open it so he could verify what Darren claimed he bought. Darren refused consent. He explained that he had already provided identification and that there was no probable cause for a search. He didn't say it to embarrass the officer. He said it because the request was outside the limits of what the officer had the right to demand in that moment. Rourke took that refusal personally. He started talking like Darren was creating the problem, which is a common pressure move. He implied Darren was being evasive. He hinted that consequences could follow if Darren didn't cooperate the way Rourke wanted. He also leaned toward the kind of suggestion that poisons a situation fast, making Darren sound like he might be connected to theft without offering a real allegation. The parking lot didn't stay private. People nearby noticed what was happening and started recording on their phones. That mattered, because once multiple cameras are rolling, an officer can't rely on a later report to be the only version of events. A few minutes later, 2 more officers arrived, Leah Nakamura and Carlos Mendez. They didn't come in ready to pile on. They came in trying to figure out what Rourke had, because from the outside, it looked like a man with a purchase bag was being treated like a suspect without a clear basis. Nakamura pressed for the legal reason. Mendez pushed in the same direction, trying to get Rourke to state the actual justification or end the contact. Rourke still didn't anchor the stop to a specific claim. His explanations kept circling around the same vague idea that Darren matched something. With the bag issue still central, the whole context started to look less like policing and more like control. Nakamura made the decision that stopped it from getting worse. She told Darren he was free to go. Mendez backed that up, urging Rourke to end the stop instead of forcing a situation he couldn't legally support. Darren left the parking lot carefully and drove away without giving Rourke an excuse to claim reckless behavior. Once he was clear of the scene, Darren did what most people don't do after a stop like that. He documented it immediately. He wrote down the time, the location, the patrol car numbers, the officers involved, and the exact language that was used to justify the stop and push for a search. That same night, Rourke filed an official report portraying Darren as evasive and non-compliant and framing the contact as justified. Nakamura and Mendez filed their own reports, and their accounts did not support the stop as Rourke described it. They flagged the lack of a clear basis and recommended supervisory review. Meanwhile, the bystander videos started circulating online, and those recordings captured the shifting explanations and the pressure to search without a concrete reason. Darren didn't wait until he got home to start processing what happened. He handled it the way he'd been trained to handle any questionable contact that might turn into a bigger issue later. He built a timeline while it was still fresh. He parked somewhere safe, opened a notes app, and wrote it out in order. The location outside the jewelry store at Tyson's Corner Center. The time he exited. The moment the cruiser pulled in behind him and blocked his car. The officer's name and badge number if visible. Unit identifiers on the vehicle. The arrival of the other two officers. The repeated use of matched a description without an actual description. The demand to open the shopping bag. The refusal of consent. The implied threats about being labeled suspicious or tied to theft. He knew why this mattered. If the officer tried to justify the stop later, the first thing that would show up would be a report that made the officer look reasonable and made Darren look like the problem. A clean timeline, created immediately, cuts through that. Once Darren got home, he made the next move. He reported the incident through his Secret Service chain of command, not with emotion, with facts, names, times, exact behavior, and a clear description of what the officer demanded and what Darren refused. His supervisor, Dana Whitaker, didn't treat it like a casual complaint. She recognized the risk right away. A baseless detention involving a federal agent is one issue. A baseless detention involving a black man on camera is a second issue. A baseless detention, followed by a report that twists the facts, becomes a third, because now it's not just bad judgment in the moment. It's misconduct after the fact. Whitaker told Darren to preserve everything: notes, receipts, any messages, any video he could locate. She also advised him to keep his public response controlled until they understood what local police were putting on paper. Darren did one more practical thing that night. He kept the receipt for the purchase in the bag and took photos of it. He wasn't proving anything to himself. He was protecting the record. While Darren was doing that, Officer Rourke was doing his own version of documentation. Rourke's report painted Darren as evasive and uncooperative. It framed the contact as a reasonable response to suspicion and made the shopping bag seem central, as if the bag itself justified pressure to search. The report leaned hard on tone and implication, the usual way an officer tries to cover a stop that never had a real foundation. The problem was that Rourke wasn't the only one writing. Officers Nakamura and Mendez filed their own reports, and they didn't support Rourke's story. They described a stop without a clear basis and emphasized that the justification kept staying vague. They noted the push for a bag search without probable cause and flagged the contact for supervisory review. That internal split mattered. Departments can bury a single complaint. They struggle to bury contradictions inside their own paperwork, especially when those contradictions come from officers on scene. Then the phones in the parking lot did what phones always do now. Bystanders uploaded clips, different angles, different distances, same moment. Darren boxed in, Rourke pressuring, explanations shifting. The recordings didn't need commentary. They showed the posture, the blocking cruiser, the absence of a clear crime, and the insistence on searching anyway. By late evening, the videos were already spreading beyond local circles. People were tagging the department, local reporters, civil rights accounts, anyone who covered police conduct. Comments piled up fast because viewers recognized the pattern: vague suspicion, forced compliance. Then a report later that would frame the civilian as the problem. Now the department had two pressures at once. Inside the system, it had conflicting reports from its own officers. Outside the system, it had public video evidence that made the official narrative harder to control. Dana Whitaker reviewed what Darren had and made a decision with him. If the department tried to quietly smooth it over, the public version would still exist, and Darren would still be the person in the video being treated like a suspect for buying a gift. Silence would turn the incident into something people argued about without hearing from the person it happened to. That's where Darren brought in legal counsel. Civil rights attorney Tessa Lang didn't approach it like a viral moment. She approached it like a case that could survive court. She asked for the timeline. She asked for the receipt. She asked for names. She asked for the other officers' involvement. She asked whether body cameras were present, whether the cruiser had dash video, and whether the department had already preserved evidence. Lang's goal wasn't to win online. It was to force preservation and accountability before anyone could lose footage or reshape the record through selective documentation. By early morning, the situation had reached a point where the department couldn't pretend it was just an ordinary contact. Supervisors were already being pulled into internal conversations. Questions started circulating about Rourke's history because once a video goes viral, people stop looking at one incident and start looking for a pattern. Darren decided he wasn't going to let the story be told only by a police report and a few social media clips. He was going to put his name on it with support behind him and make the issue about the conduct, not about speculation. That set up what happened the next day. By the next morning, Darren understood the problem clearly. If he stayed quiet, the public would hear the story through a police report written by the same officer who escalated the stop. The videos would keep spreading, but without a clear statement, people would fill in gaps with assumptions. Darren wasn't going to let that happen. He chose to speak publicly, and he did it in the most controlled way possible. A press conference was set up that day. Darren appeared in uniform, not to flex, but to remove the usual excuse that he was just some guy who didn't understand law enforcement. His supervisor, Dana Whitaker, stood with him to show the agency took it seriously. Civil rights attorney Tessa Lang stood nearby to signal that this wouldn't be handled with empty promises. Nia stood beside her dad, because the whole reason he was at that mall was her birthday gift, and the public needed to see what the stop actually was. A father shopping, then getting treated like a suspect. Darren laid out the facts in order. He explained he'd been blocked in. He explained he'd been ordered to provide ID. He explained the officer never gave a specific crime, only a vague claim about a description. He explained the demand to open the shopping bag and his refusal to consent without probable cause. He explained the presence of bystanders recording, and he made it clear he documented the incident immediately afterward. No theatrics, no yelling. He framed it as racial profiling and an unlawful detention, because that's what it looked like and what the evidence supported. Tessa Lang followed with the legal framing, keeping it tight. She emphasized the basic rules. An officer needs a real reason to detain someone, and a search demand doesn't become lawful just because a person looks like someone the officer decided to suspect. She also put agencies on notice about evidence preservation. Body camera files, dash video, dispatch calls, supervisor notes, and any internal messages about the incident needed to be preserved because missing footage would become its own scandal. The press conference changed the situation immediately. Once Darren's identity and role became public, the department couldn't treat it like a complaint. They could stall out. Local officials started getting calls. The department's command staff faced questions they couldn't answer with vague statements. Reporters asked what the description was, what theft report existed, why a shopping bag became the focus, why the officer's explanation kept shifting on video. That's where Rourke's position got weaker by the hour. He needed his report to stand as the official truth, but the videos were already contradicting the way he described the contact. The public didn't need to interpret law to see the basics. They could see the car blocked. They could see the officer pressing for a bag search without a clear reason. They could see the stop stretching out, while the explanation stayed fuzzy. The department announced immediate administrative action. Rourke was suspended pending investigation. Internal Affairs opened a formal review. Prosecutors and outside agencies were pressured to look at it too, because allegations of unlawful detention and false reporting don't stay internal once evidence goes public and attorneys get involved. Inside the department, the split reports from Nakamura and Mendez became a turning point. Their accounts didn't just disagree with Rourke. They described the stop as unsupported and flagged the conduct for supervisory review. That made it harder for leadership to pretend this was a simple misunderstanding, because two officers on scene were basically saying the stop never had solid footing. And once supervisors started pulling on the thread, Rourke's history came into view. Complaints that might have been ignored before suddenly mattered, because patterns matter in investigations and lawsuits. If leadership had warnings about his conduct and failed to act, then the problem wasn't only Rourke. It was the system that kept him in position to do it again. Public reaction intensified as more people recognized the details. The location was high profile. The video was clear. The stop was easy to understand without legal jargon. A black man bought a gift, then got treated like a suspect and pressured into a search. Darren didn't let the attention turn it into a spectacle. He kept the focus on accountability and process. He repeated that he wanted the same thing any ordinary person should get: lawful policing, clear justification for stops, and consequences for false reporting. Behind the scenes, Lang's team moved fast. They began gathering everything that would outlast public outrage. Witness names from the parking lot, copies of the videos in original quality, store records that could confirm Darren's purchase time, any available mall security footage, requests that locked down Bodycam retention before anything could be overwritten. The reason was simple. Public attention fades. Evidence doesn't, as long as you secure it early. By the end of that week, the situation had become bigger than one stop. Multiple agencies were now involved in reviewing conduct and reports. Supervisors had to answer why a stop without a clear allegation got that far in the first place. The department had to explain why its own officers on scene disagreed about the legitimacy of the detention. Rourke's report was no longer just a document in a file. It was a claim being tested against video, witnesses, and internal contradictions. Darren's side wasn't just preparing for a complaint process. They were preparing for court. The lawsuit didn't start as a social media moment. Tessa Lang filed it like a structural case because that's what Darren's evidence supported. She centered the facts of the stop first: a cruiser blocking a parked car, a demand for ID without a clear allegation, and a push to search a purchase bag without probable cause. Then she widened it to the part that made the case hard to dismiss. What happened after? Rourke didn't just make a questionable stop. He tried to lock in his version with an official report that painted Darren as evasive and non-compliant. That report mattered because it wasn't just an opinion. It was a document that could justify future stops, trigger databases, and create consequences for Darren if someone later treated that report as truth. Lang's team attacked the report the same way they attacked the stop, by comparing it against independent evidence. They lined up the timeline Darren wrote immediately after leaving. They matched that to the bystander videos and witness statements from the parking lot. They pulled store purchase records to confirm Darren's time in the jewelry store and the transaction. They pursued mall security footage where it existed. They requested dispatch logs and any body cam or dash footage tied to the units on scene. They also obtained the internal reports from Nakamura and Mendez, which didn't support Rourke's justification and flagged the stop for review. That mix is what turns an he said, she said into a measurable problem. When video, receipts, witness accounts, and other officers' reports all point in the same direction, the official story can't survive by volume alone. As the case moved forward, investigators started looking at Rourke's conduct through two lenses: the legality of the stop and the integrity of the reporting. The first issue was serious. The second one can end careers. Because once an officer writes something that doesn't match evidence, it stops being a mistake and starts looking like deliberate falsification. Prosecutors and internal investigators know that false reporting can be used to cover unlawful detention. They also know it isn't harmless, even if nobody got arrested. A false report can become a weapon later. That's the point where Rourke's situation shifted from department discipline to personal exposure. The department also got pulled into the case in a bigger way than it expected. As Lang dug into records and complaints, the lawsuit expanded beyond Darren's stop and alleged a pattern the department had tolerated. Not just one officer making one bad call, but weak oversight that let questionable stops and sloppy reporting keep happening without serious consequences. Public pressure didn't do the legal work, but it did one thing that mattered. It made it harder for the system to slow walk the process and hope the attention died off. The resolution came in layers. First came the money, because civil rights cases often end that way when the evidence is strong and the risk of trial is high. The final number landed around $6 million, structured as a judgment or settlement that acknowledged serious wrongdoing and closed the civil side under specific terms. Then came the accountability that money can't buy. Rourke faced criminal consequences tied to his conduct and reporting. The case centered on unlawful actions under color of law and false statements in official documentation. The result was a conviction and a prison sentence. It wasn't a symbolic punishment. It was the kind of outcome that tells other officers the report is not a shield if the evidence proves it's a lie. The department didn't get to treat it as one bad apple either. More personnel faced discipline, including terminations and sanctions, tied to supervision failures and evidence handling issues. Even where people weren't fired, careers stalled. Command staff had to answer for what they ignored and what they signed off on. The reforms were written into the aftermath in a way that forced change instead of promising it. Complaint oversight tightened. More cases had to be reviewed by supervisors outside the immediate chain. Body camera rules became stricter, especially around activation and retention. Evidence preservation became mandatory once a complaint reached certain thresholds, with penalties for missing footage or delayed handling. False reporting got treated as a high-level offense with serious consequences, not something handled quietly. Darren didn't walk away from this feeling like the system magically fixed itself. He knew better than that. He also didn't frame it like a personal victory lap. He kept his federal job. He stayed in service. He used the outcome as leverage to push for stronger protections for people who don't have his training, his badge, or a supervisor who can pick up the phone and be heard. That was the point he kept coming back to privately and publicly. Most people in that parking lot wouldn't have had a clean path to fight a false report and force evidence preservation. Nia carried her own lesson from it. She watched her dad get treated like a suspect while doing something normal, then watched him respond without losing control. She saw how calm behavior doesn't guarantee safety, but it does protect your options later. She also saw how cameras and documentation can keep a powerful person from rewriting reality. That's what this story teaches. If someone tries to bully you into giving up your rights, staying calm is only step one. The next step is making sure the facts exist outside their paperwork. Notes, receipts, witnesses, video, and immediate reporting through whatever legitimate channels you have. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were Darren, would you have opened the shopping bag just to end it faster? Or would you have refused consent and held the line? Drop your answer in the comments and share the story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real grounded stories where accountability actually lands and the truth doesn't get buried, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Ma'am, who is this child?
My daughter. We're eating breakfast. What's going on?
What's her name? Where does she live?
With me. If you need information, talk to me.
Sweetheart, what's your mom's name?
Officer, please don't interview her like that. Here's my ID.
Stand up for me. Step into the aisle.
I'm not leaving my child alone.
Racial profiling crashed into a child's birthday breakfast when a patrol officer walked into Maple Street Bakery and Diner, ignored every normal sign of a family outing, and treated a black mother sitting with her white 5-year-old like an act of kidnapping. What should have been a quick welfare check turned into a full escalation. Radio codes, non-compliance language, and a public arrest attempt built on nothing but a stranger's discomfort. And because the whole place started recording, this didn't stay a messy diner moment. It turned into a civil rights investigation, a termination, and a $2 million settlement that forced the city to answer a question they didn't want on camera. Why did "it doesn't look right" automatically mean criminal when the mom was black? All right, real quick. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you're tired of people getting bullied by uniforms and assumptions, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now rewind it because the part that makes this infuriating is how normal it started. Danielle Harper showed up at Maple Street the same way she did almost every Saturday. Same time window, same booth near the corner where Lily could see the pastry case and the old spinning dessert stand. Danielle liked routines. Lily loved them. Lily was turning 5, and she had the kind of birthday excitement that made her talk with her hands and bounce in her seat like she had springs under her. Danielle wasn't trying to be seen. No big party, no loud group. Just breakfast, candles on pancakes, and that little family tradition they'd built after the adoption finalized. Maple Street knew them, not in a formal way, in a human way. The hostess recognized Lily's face. A server had already learned what Lily usually ordered. People nodded at Danielle because regulars nod at regulars. It was that kind of place. That's why the call came off so ugly when it happened. Somebody in the diner, another customer, not staff, looked over and decided the scene didn't look right. That was the whole complaint. No report of a struggle, no crying child, no one running. Just a black woman sitting with a white child eating breakfast. Like that was suspicious enough to involve a badge. Dispatch sent it as a vague child welfare concern. No hard facts, no allegation with details. Just a check it out. And Officer Evan Kessler took that vague call and walked in like he'd been handed a case that needed a hero. He didn't scan the room like a neutral responder. He didn't talk to the hostess first. He didn't ask staff, the people who actually knew the diner's regulars. He locked onto that booth and went straight there. Danielle noticed the shift immediately. Not because she scared easy, because she understood posture. She understood the way some officers moved when they already decided what they were looking at. Lily noticed too, not with words, but with that kid instinct that tells them when the room changes. Kessler stopped at the edge of the booth and positioned himself like a barrier, like he was there to control, not to clarify. He focused on Lily first, then Danielle, then Lily again. He started asking questions in a way that didn't treat Danielle like a parent. He treated her like a problem he expected to solve by pressure. Danielle stayed calm. She didn't perform panic. She didn't raise her voice. She did what a responsible adult does when a uniform walks up to their table with that kind of energy. She anchored the moment. She kept Lily close. She answered in a steady tone. She offered identification right away because she knew how quickly a simple check could turn into something else if the officer wanted it to. And Lily, 5 years old, still small enough to swing her legs under the table, answered like a kid who had nothing to hide. Lily acted like this was weird, but not scary yet. She had no reason to be scared yet. The diner around them started paying attention. You know how it goes. One table notices, then another. Forks slow down. A server pauses a little too long near the booth. People sense when something is about to go sideways. And Kessler, he didn't de-escalate. He leaned in. He started pushing the moment toward compliance, toward control, toward that familiar script where the person being questioned has to prove their innocence fast enough, politely enough, and perfectly enough to satisfy an officer's vibe check. That's where this story actually began. Because the next thing Kessler did, right there in front of Lily's birthday breakfast, told everyone watching that he wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for a reason. Kessler didn't start with neutral questions. He started with control. He kept his body between Danielle and the aisle. He aimed his attention at Lily, like Danielle wasn't the obvious adult in charge. He asked for names, asked where Lily lived, asked who brought her here. Not in a casual way, in a testing way, like he wanted inconsistency. Danielle answered cleanly, and she didn't ramble. She didn't argue. She kept it simple, like anyone who's dealt with authority knows to do when the vibe turns. She handed over her ID without being asked twice. She explained Lily was her adopted daughter. She offered the adoption documents immediately because she carried copies for stuff like school paperwork and travel. Normal parent prep. Lily backed her up without hesitation. Kid-level confidence. No fear, no confusion. She described Danielle as her mom, the same way a child says the sky is blue. It was casual. It was real. That should have ended it. Kessler didn't accept it. He looked at the ID, looked at Danielle, then looked back at Lily like the kid's calm didn't matter. He asked Lily more questions. He asked them in a way that put pressure on her to perform the right answers. Danielle stayed steady and kept redirecting the focus back to her, because that's what any good parent does when a stranger with a badge starts interviewing a 5-year-old at a breakfast table. Kessler framed that as a problem. He said Danielle was interfering. He implied she was coaching. He used that tone officers use when they want the room to hear that the person is being difficult. He started building his story out loud. Danielle didn't match his energy. She didn't give him a scene. She kept her voice controlled and repeated the basics. She was Lily's mother. Lily was safe. Documents were right there, and there was no emergency. That's when Kessler made a choice that can't be walked back. He keyed his radio and called in a child abduction code. In a diner, with Lily sitting there. Now everybody's heads turned. Staff stopped pretending not to stare. Customers started pulling out phones for real. You could feel the room switch from curious to alarmed. That's what that radio call does. It paints a target. It turns a family into a spectacle. The server who knew them stepped in first. Not aggressive, just firm. She told Kessler this was a regular mother-daughter pair. Every Saturday. Same booth, same routine. The hostess backed it up. A couple of customers did too. People who'd seen them enough times to recognize them, even if they didn't know their last names. Kessler didn't care. He acted like the whole diner was lying. Or clueless, or both. He dismissed the witnesses the way insecure authority does. If the crowd won't confirm his suspicion, the crowd becomes part of the problem. A second officer arrived. Different energy. Quieter. He didn't posture. He looked at Lily, looked at Danielle, looked at the situation like a human being trying to understand what's actually happening. Danielle handed him the adoption paperwork. He reviewed it, actually read it. He checked names, dates, signatures. He asked a couple short, clarifying questions that made sense. Then his body language changed. You could tell he understood. This was real. This was legitimate. This was a family having breakfast. He tried to convey that to Kessler. Kessler still didn't back down. Because by then, this wasn't about Lily's safety, not really. This was about Kessler committing to his original assumption and refusing to take the exit ramp. He'd already dropped the abduction code. He'd already made Danielle the suspect in front of a room full of people. If he admitted he was wrong, he'd be exposed in real time. So he doubled down. He started giving Danielle orders that didn't fit the situation. Stand up, step away, move here, put your hands where I can see them. He treated mother sitting in a booth like dangerous unknown subject. Danielle refused to play along with humiliation. She didn't refuse cooperation. She refused nonsense. Big difference. She kept offering the same reasonable solution. Verify the documents. Confirm identity. Talk to staff. End it. Handle it like a professional. Kessler twisted that into failure to comply. And the second officer? He didn't want to fight his partner in the middle of a crowded diner. He hovered in that uncomfortable space. Officers sometimes get stuck in, knowing the escalation is wrong, but not stepping hard enough to stop it. Phones kept recording. You could see it happening from every angle. Customers weren't whispering anymore. They were narrating with their cameras. Staff looked stressed because they knew what this was turning into. Lily started picking up on the danger. Her face changed. Less birthday. More confusion. She clutched the edge of the booth and watched Danielle the way kids do when they're checking if the adult is still in control of the world. Danielle stayed calm anyway. That was the scary part. Calm doesn't mean safe. Calm just means she knew exactly what he was doing. And Kessler, he pushed it to the edge on purpose. He told Danielle she was obstructing. He said she was interfering with an investigation. He treated her steady tone like defiance. He set up the last step, the one that lets an officer turn a bad stop into an arrest without admitting the original reason was garbage. He reached for his cuffs, and Lily saw it. Kessler didn't pause to reassess. He went straight to force. He told Danielle she needed to stand up and step away from the booth. He framed it like a lawful order tied to a kidnapping investigation, even though he still had zero facts beyond a stranger's vibe. Danielle stayed seated for a second because Lily sat right next to her, and she wasn't about to leave her kid alone at a table while an officer hovered. That's when Kessler flipped the language again. He said Danielle was obstructing. He said she refused to comply. He said it loud enough for the room to hear it, because he wanted the crowd to accept his version before anyone could challenge it. Danielle didn't yell back. She didn't panic. She repeated the same points, steady and clear. Lily was safe. Lily already confirmed she was her mother. Her ID matched, and the adoption documents were available and already reviewed by another officer. She told him there was no probable cause to treat this like a kidnapping. Kessler didn't respond to any of that. He responded to the fact that Danielle wasn't shrinking. He reached in, grabbed Danielle's arm, and ordered her out of the booth. Not gently, not with any concern for the kid inches away. He pulled her up and backed her into the aisle where everyone could see. This is where a lot of officers would have stopped. They would have taken the off-ramp, saved face, called it a misunderstanding, and walked out. Kessler chose humiliation. He turned Danielle toward him and went for the cuffs. He announced the arrest as obstruction and failure to comply. He made it sound procedural, like it was inevitable, like Danielle caused it by not obeying his script. And Lily's face changed fast. She didn't understand probable cause or obstruction. She understood her mom getting grabbed. She understood metal cuffs. She understood the officer voice. Her birthday breakfast turned into fear in about 3 seconds. She started crying and calling for Danielle. She tried to stand up like she wanted to follow, then froze because she didn't know if she was allowed. Kids lock up like that. They want to move, but they don't know what the rules are anymore. Danielle tried to keep her voice calm for Lily, even while Kessler pulled her hands behind her back. That's the part people in the diner remembered later. Danielle didn't perform rage. She stayed controlled for her child. Customers stood up. Not all at once, but enough that the room shifted. A man near the counter told Kessler he was wrong. A woman closer to the booth told him the paperwork had already been shown. Staff tried to move towards Lily because Lily was shaking and crying, and nobody wanted a 5-year-old sitting alone while her mom got cuffed 10 feet away. Kessler pushed the crowd back verbally. He treated every witness like a threat to his authority. He made it about scene control. That's how escalation survives in public. You label everyone else the problem. Phones captured everything. Multiple angles. Faces. Audio. The exact sequence. Kessler didn't stop them. He couldn't. Too many people. Too many cameras. And the more he escalated, the more confident the diners got that they were watching something wrong in real time. Danielle, cuffed in the aisle, stopped trying to convince him with paperwork. She switched tactics. She stated, clearly and without drama, that she was a magistrate judge in the county. She said the arrest lacked probable cause. She said the whole diner just witnessed him ignore identification, ignore adoption documents, ignore staff confirmations, and ignore a child's own statement. That landed. Not because judge is magic, because it exposed what Kessler was doing. He wasn't carefully investigating. He was committing to a narrative and punishing Danielle for not playing submissive. Kessler reacted the way officers react when their target suddenly has status. He didn't instantly apologize. He didn't uncuff her. He didn't back up. He got sharper. He insisted she was resisting by speaking. He told her to stop talking. He told her she'd explain it downtown. He tried to move her toward the exit, like getting her out of the diner would save him from the witnesses and the recordings. That move almost worked too, for about a second, because the second officer, still there, still holding the adoption papers earlier, looked uncomfortable now. Staff weren't backing down. Customers weren't backing down. Lily was crying harder, and that alone made the scene look even worse. And right as Kessler tried to steer Danielle away from the booth, he got told a supervisor was en route. Sergeant Mark Delaney. The room didn't relax. It held its breath. Danielle stayed upright, cuffed, calm, watching the door, not begging, not pleading, just waiting for someone with enough authority to stop the stupidity. Lily sat in the booth crying, staring at the aisle where her mom stood in handcuffs, and the entire diner knew this wasn't about a child's safety anymore. It was about an officer refusing to admit he was wrong. Sergeant Mark Delaney walked in and saw the whole thing in one glance. A crying 5-year-old in a booth, a black woman in cuffs in the aisle, staff frozen behind the counter, and a half circle of customers holding phones like they were documenting a crime scene. Delaney didn't start with chest thumping. He started with facts. He asked Kessler what the original call said. Vague welfare concern. Something doesn't look right. No description of danger, no allegation of force, nothing specific. Delaney asked what Kessler had verified. Kessler tried to sell non-compliance. He leaned on the usual phrasing, the kind that makes an arrest sound clean on paper. Danielle didn't interrupt. She let him talk. That's what confident people do when they know the record is about to bury someone. Delaney then asked for Danielle's name again. He stepped a few feet away and did the simplest check in the world. He pulled up the county court website on his phone. Danielle Harper, magistrate judge, listed publicly. Easy to confirm. Delaney's posture changed immediately. Not because Danielle was a judge, but because it proved something bigger. Kessler had ignored obvious exits. He had chosen escalation, and now he'd done it in a room full of witnesses. Delaney walked back, apologized directly, and personally removed the cuffs. No grand speech. Just a quick, clean correction, the way a supervisor does when the situation is indefensible. Danielle went straight back to Lily. She didn't chase revenge in the aisle. She focused on her kid first. She held Lily, calmed her down, and told staff to bring water and something small for Lily to hold. That's what mattered in that moment. Delaney pulled Kessler aside. Quiet but firm, he took control of the scene. He asked staff for statements and contact info. He asked the second officer to document what he'd reviewed, including the adoption paperwork. And the phones? They didn't stop recording. People had captured the full arc. The targeting, the radio code, the refusal to accept ID and documents, the arrest attempt, the child crying, the supervisor verifying online and uncuffing her. That video hit the internet fast. By that afternoon, local pages had it. By the next day, regional outlets picked it up. People weren't arguing about both sides. The footage made it plain. A random customer's discomfort triggered police action. Kessler treated an interracial family like a crime by default. Then, the city tried to survive it. Internal Affairs opened an investigation. The department requested Bodycam, radio logs, dispatch audio, and Kessler's report. They interviewed staff, diners, and the other responding officer. They compared timelines to the video and to the abduction code Kessler radioed. That's where Kessler's problem got worse. Investigators found he didn't just escalate. He also wrote it up like Danielle caused it. He claimed she refused basic cooperation. He framed the situation like he had reasonable suspicion that wasn't there. And witnesses contradicted him across the board. The second officer's notes undercut him too. Once that door opened, the department looked wider. They found a pattern, similar calls, similar stops, same theme. Black parents with white children getting treated like they needed to prove they belonged together. The department could see it in incident notes, in complaints, and in how certain suspicious person calls kept turning into child welfare investigations. with no factual basis. Kessler got suspended while the review ran. Then he got terminated, not for having a bad day, for policy violations and false statements in his report. That detail mattered because cities can excuse judgment calls. They can't as easily excuse documented dishonesty tied to rights violations, especially when the video exists. Danielle didn't keep it in-house. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Her claim wasn't complicated. The city's policies and enforcement allowed racial bias to become suspicion. Kessler detained and arrested without probable cause. Lily endured trauma from a baseless escalation in public. Witnesses and video proved the sequence. The department's own findings made it worse for the city, not better. The city tried to posture early, that's what they do. Then discovery loomed. Depositions, dispatch protocols, prior complaints, training records. If this went to trial, it wouldn't just be about Kessler. It would expose the system that let him act like that. So they settled. $2 million. Danielle didn't treat it like a lottery win. She treated it like an obligation with a plan. She secured Lily's future first. Education, stability, therapy support for the fear that got planted that morning. Then Danielle put money into legal aid work that helps families who don't have her credentials. Families who get crushed by failure to comply charges when they didn't do anything wrong. In the department, they made changes because they had to. They tightened response standards for vague something doesn't look right calls involving children. They pushed supervisors to review child abduction code decisions when the underlying facts were thin. They retrained officers on what reasonable suspicion actually requires. They also made dispatch language less suggestive because the first label can poison the whole encounter. A year later, Danielle went back to Maple Street with Lily. Same day of the week, same booth. Not because she forgot, because she refused to let the worst day steal a good tradition. She kept it controlled. She told staff ahead of time. She kept Lily comfortable. She made it normal again, on purpose. That's the piece people miss. Justice isn't only firing an officer or cutting a check. It's a family getting their life back without acting scared in public. So here's the question for you. If you were in that diner, would you have recorded? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked down at your plate and hoped it wasn't your problem? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with somebody who needs the reminder. And subscribe if you want more stories where bias meets the record and the record wins.
All right, don't move. What's in the bag?
Why you ask?
Open the bag. Now.
No, ma'am.
Don't fool me. I watched the handoff. That was a drug deal. Open it.
I'm not consenting to a search. If you have probable cause, say your facts.
You don't get to tell me what to do.
Racial profiling met constitutional limits in a city park when a patrol officer decided a bag handoff had to be a drug deal, then tried to force a search without a warrant, without consent, and without facts she could clearly explain. Officer Dana Kessler spotted the exchange from the walkway near the parking edge of the park. Two men met near a bench, spoke briefly, and one handed the other a small bag. The movement was quick, but not frantic. They didn't run, hide, or act like they were trying to disappear. They simply separated by a few steps and stayed in the same area. Kessler treated it like she'd just witnessed a crime. She approached with purpose, closed distance, and started directing the interaction instead of asking neutral questions. Her first focus was the bag. She wanted it opened. She wanted to look inside. She spoke like it was a normal procedure and like refusal would not be an option. One of the men, Malik Reed, didn't get loud and didn't get sarcastic. He kept his voice steady and his body language controlled. He asked if they were being detained and what crime she believed had occurred. When she repeated that she needed to see inside the bag, he made it clear he wasn't giving consent and that a search required a lawful basis. The second man, Evan Hart, held the bag and said very little. He stayed still, watched her hands, and let Malik handle the conversation. He didn't try to walk away quickly. He didn't argue with her. He didn't act nervous. He just didn't comply. Kessler didn't accept that boundary. She doubled down and tried to turn her suspicion into authority. She described what she saw as suspicious, and she treated that word like it replaced probable cause. She kept returning to the same demand, insisting the bag be opened immediately. She also started using the kind of vague safety language officers rely on when they don't have concrete facts. Public park, families nearby, children in the area. Something dangerous could be inside. Malik didn't debate emotions. He didn't try to talk her into liking him. He stayed on the rules. He repeated that a hunch wasn't enough, and he didn't give her extra information that could be twisted into justification. He kept asking the same core question. What specific facts supported a search right now? That's when the pressure tactic started. Kessler's tone sharpened. She tried ordering instead of asking. She hinted that refusing made them look guilty. She leaned on her badge and her role and acted as if that alone gave her the power to search. She positioned herself closer to the bag as if she might reach for it, and the interaction stopped being a conversation and started looking like it could turn into a property grab. People nearby noticed. A jogger slowed down on the path. A couple on a bench looked up and stayed watching. The officer was now performing in public, and her need to win the moment increased. Malik still didn't raise his voice. He didn't step toward her. He simply held his ground, kept his hands visible, and repeated that there was no consent and no lawful basis. Evan remained calm and kept the bag secure, not tugging it away, not making sudden movements, and not giving her the reaction she seemed to want. Kessler got frustrated and said the quiet part out loud. She made a racist remark, pointing them toward the ghetto, as if that explained why she was treating them like suspects. It wasn't a legal argument. It wasn't officer safety. It was bias, slipping out in front of witnesses. That moment changed the entire tone of the encounter. Malik didn't respond with insults or anger. He paused, then kept his focus on legality and accountability, because he understood what escalation would give her. An excuse to change the narrative from unlawful search attempt to non-compliant subject. Evan finally spoke, and he spoke to end the situation, not to argue. He identified himself as United States Secret Service. He stated that the bag was tied to a secure transfer connected to his work. He did not explain the contents in detail because he didn't need to, and because he wasn't going to disclose sensitive information to a local officer in a public park. He made one point clear. Her attempt to detain them and force a search was interfering with a federal protective function. Kessler's confidence collapsed immediately. Her posture shifted, her voice softened. She stepped back, apologized, and disengaged as fast as she could. Right after the hook, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Country, state, or city. And if you watch these stories because you care about rights, accountability, and people staying calm under pressure, hit like and subscribe. Now, here's what led up to that moment, because Kessler didn't just stumble into this. She made a series of choices, and each one pushed her closer to a line she couldn't explain away once the wrong person turned out to be involved. Kessler backed away, but she didn't fully leave right away. She hovered in that awkward zone officers slip into when they realize they've overplayed their hand and now need an exit that doesn't look like defeat. Her first move was to try to reset the story. She asked for identification again, but the tone changed. Less command, more careful. The kind of careful that shows up when someone suddenly remembers reports exist, body cameras exist, and people standing 10 feet away can hear everything. Evan kept it controlled. He didn't argue about her bias. He didn't lecture her about the Constitution. He did what federal agents do when a local stop starts drifting into a problem. He narrowed the conversation, stated his role, and made it clear she was interfering with something she didn't understand. Malik stayed steady, too. He didn't win loudly. He didn't taunt. He simply held the line that mattered. No consent, no search, no seizure. That mattered because the officer was still looking for a way to claim she had permission or a legal reason. Without that, she had nothing. Kessler tried a different angle. She framed the encounter like she was doing a normal welfare check for the park. She referenced families nearby again, trying to make it sound like her behavior had been about safety from the start. The problem was that everyone had just watched her demand the bag be opened, as if she already decided it was drugs. That shift didn't match what people saw. Evan cut through the fog. He told her the transfer was secure, time-sensitive, and not open to her inspection. He also made it clear that if she continued to block them or tried to take the bag, it would become a federal issue fast. This is where Kessler's radio came into play. She turned slightly away and keyed up. Not a long call, not a full breakdown, but enough to get guidance and cover herself. The language she used sounded like she wanted permission to keep pushing, but she couldn't say, "I want to search a bag because I assumed drugs." She had to dress it up as suspicious activity and refusal to comply. She didn't get the green light she wanted. Even the most aggressive supervisor knows a problem when they hear one. No clear crime, no articulable facts. A consent search attempt going sideways in public. Add a federal credential in the mix, and the smart response becomes disengage. Kessler returned to the men and shifted into damage control. She apologized. Not a full ownership apology, more like a quick exit apology, the kind that tries to close the interaction without creating a clean soundbite of admission. She stepped back further, told them they were free to go, and tried to end it like it had been routine. Malik didn't let the record get rewritten in real time. He reminded her calmly that she had demanded a search without a warrant and without probable cause. He didn't argue back and forth. He stated it once so it was clear, and so it would sit in her memory the way it needed to. That mattered because officers often try to walk away with the last word. Malik didn't chase the last word. He made sure the facts didn't get buried. Evan kept his focus on finishing the transfer. He moved with purpose, not speed. He didn't want to look like he was fleeing, and he didn't want to invite another round of suspicion. He and Malik walked away normally, the same way they had been standing there, normally before Kessler decided the scene needed a villain. The bystanders didn't just forget what they heard. A few people had phones out by the time the racist remark landed. Nobody needed a cinematic angle. The park was quiet enough. The words carried. Kessler had created witnesses the moment she raised her voice and tried to force compliance. She couldn't take that back. Within minutes, Malik and Evan were away from the immediate area, and Evan made a call. Not dramatic, not angry. Operational. He needed his chain of command to know a local officer had interfered, attempted to search, and injected bias into the interaction. Protective work runs on documentation. If something goes wrong later, the question is always the same. Who knew and when? Malik did his own version of that. He didn't post immediately. He didn't rant. He took note of the badge number, the time, the location, and what was said. That's what people learn to do after they've seen how quickly a bad report can turn into a clean excuse for misconduct. Memory isn't enough. Details matter. Kessler, meanwhile, didn't drive off feeling proud. She drove off trying to figure out what would land on her desk first. A complaint, a supervisor question, or a request for her body camera. Because now there were two problems instead of one. The first problem was legal. She tried to force a search with no clear, lawful basis. The second problem was personal. She exposed bias out loud, in public, while acting like she had unquestionable authority. And those two together don't stay contained. By the time Kessler cleared the park loop, She had already started building her version of events in her head. Officers do that when they know they push too far. They start thinking about how it'll sound in a report, not what actually happened. She couldn't write, "I assumed it was drugs." So she went with the usual cover words: suspicious exchange, high visibility area, public safety concern, refusal to comply. She also couldn't cleanly explain why she demanded the bag be opened without consent, without a warrant, and without a specific crime. That gap mattered because reports don't just document what happened. They become the department's shield if someone complains. This time, the shield didn't fit. Evan's side documented the interference immediately, not because he wanted to punish a random cop, but because protective work runs on clear records. When a local officer inserts herself into something sensitive, that becomes a security issue. It also becomes a liability issue. His supervisors needed a paper trail showing what occurred, what was said, and how quickly it was resolved. Malik documented for a different reason. He had learned that if you don't lock down details early, someone else will rewrite them for you. He noted the time, the location, the sequence, and the remark. He also tracked who was nearby, because witnesses always matter when the official story starts drifting. Within a couple days, the situation moved from annoying park stop to department problem. A complaint landed with the precinct. It wasn't vague, it wasn't emotional. It listed the attempted search, the lack of stated probable cause, the pressure tactics, and the racist comment. That last part turned it from a training issue into a credibility issue. Bias on the record creates questions a department can't ignore because it doesn't stay a private embarrassment. It becomes a pattern risk. Kessler got called in. She didn't walk into that meeting expecting applause. She walked in hoping it would be a quick reminder and a warning. That's how officers often think these things go when there's no arrest and no injury. This wasn't that. Her supervisor asked for her articulation. What crime did she believe was happening? What specific facts supported a detention? What facts supported a search request? What created probable cause? Those questions sound simple until you try to answer them without leaning on vibes. She fell back on what she had. The exchange looked suspicious. That didn't land, not the way she needed. The review also didn't stay inside her unit because Secret Service changes how people react. Even if Evan never demanded action, the mere fact that a federal protective detail got hassled during a secure transfer force conversation between agencies. The department didn't want a reputation for interfering with federal operations, and they definitely didn't want to argue that a hunch justified it. Then came the body camera review. That part hurt her more than any complaint summary, because video doesn't negotiate. It doesn't accept rewritten context. It shows tone. It shows escalation. It shows whether the officer asked questions or issued orders. It also captures the moment the racist comment hit the air. Once that was confirmed, Kessler lost the benefit of doubt she'd been counting on. The outcome stayed realistic. No movie ending, no instant firing and handcuffs. Departments rarely move like that unless there's something extreme. What she got instead was the kind of discipline that actually happens. A formal reprimand, mandatory bias and constitutional policing retraining, and removal from discretionary park patrol for a period. Her supervisor also put a clear note in her file about unlawful search pressure and inappropriate remarks. That note matters long term. It follows you. A separate directive went out to patrol units after the review. It reminded officers that suspicious isn't probable cause. Refusal isn't justification, and consent has to be voluntary. It also warned that derogatory remarks during stops trigger immediate scrutiny. It wasn't framed as because of Kessler, but everyone knew why it existed. Malik didn't get a payday. He didn't get a dramatic apology tour. What he got was something people rarely get in these moments: confirmation on paper that he was right to hold the line. He also got clarity. He saw how fast an officer could go from "I'm checking on something" to "open the bag now," and how quickly a biased assumption could become an attempted search. That reinforced a lesson he already lived by. Staying calm isn't weakness, it's control. You don't give an officer extra material to work with. You don't let them turn your reaction into their justification. Evan's takeaway was different, but just as blunt. He understood local cops have a hard job. He also understood that some officers treat public spaces like personal jurisdictions, where compliance is the goal and law is optional. That's why he escalated through his chain, and why his unit had the incident logged. Not for revenge, for oversight and prevention. Weeks later, Malik attended a community legal workshop and spoke briefly about the encounter. No grandstanding, no anti-cop speech, just practical points. Ask if you're detained. Don't consent to searches you don't want. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue in circles. And document everything. People in the room nodded because they recognized the pattern. Some shared their own stories afterward. Kessler kept working, but the encounter changed how people saw her inside the department. A racist remark on camera doesn't disappear. It becomes something coworkers remember. Supervisors watch you closer, the public watches you closer. The next time she tried to lean on "trust me," she wouldn't get it automatically. That's the real consequence. Not a headline, not a viral victory. A damaged credibility record and tighter oversight, because she showed she couldn't separate suspicion from bias and couldn't separate authority from legality. Here's the point that sticks. The Fourth Amendment doesn't shrink because an officer feels certain. Probable cause doesn't appear because someone refuses consent. And when an officer tries to force compliance without a lawful basis, the situation doesn't become legal just because they keep repeating orders louder. So what would you have done in Malik's position? Stayed silent? Asked for a supervisor? Record it openly. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a stop that felt like assumption dressed up as law, share what happened. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next story.